This is Kim Peone, and we are here for another Coffee with Kim. Of course, for January, we're in Textile Month, and so I'm so excited to have Marlowe with us. He is Dene, and he is a textile artist. And so welcome, Marlowe. How are you?
I'm doing fine. How about you?
Oh, I'm doing good, thank you. So I kind of just want to start off, Marlowe, with you telling us a little bit about yourself, where you live, and then talk about the medium in which you operate in as far as your art.
Okay. Um, I live in Winslow, Arizona currently. Um, I lived in Tucson for a long time. Um, I was born in Flagstaff, but I grew up in Winslow, if that makes sense. Just
Yes.
because that's what the doctor was, then you come back to Winslow, you live.
Right.
So then here in Winslow, you know, it's so strange. You don't hear about it until you hear other people's story, but you really get to experience it. I grew up in town. Um, both my parents spoke Navajo, but I spoke English just because you go to school, public school here in town, everybody speaks English.
Mhm.
And so I never really had that experience. And because both my parents work, their day life they spent in at work.
Mhm.
My mom sold cars and was very successful at it. So she sometimes worked late into the evening. My dad worked for the railroad. Um, and I come from a railroad family myself. My grandpa was worked for the railroad. Both of my grandpas worked for the railroad, actually. And so several of my uncles worked for the railroad. But you grow up that with that in the back of your mind. You have cousins. Sometimes you hear your parents speak Navajo, but
Mhm.
that was the gist of how you grow up. But somewhere along the way, you do spend some time, well, sometimes along the way, you spend some time with your family on the reservation and you actually realize you are Navajo. But you grow up just kind of being this person in between. So you don't know really how you identify yourself until you experience that on the reservation. So you
Mhm.
spend a lot, I spend a lot of time with my Nolly side, my paternal grandma side, and
Mhm.
your maternal grandma side. So you hear them speak the language and they both wove. And you take an interest in that because my dad used to draw a lot and used to paint with oils. I got that experience. Even though he worked on his free time, that's what he did. And he used to garden in our front yard and our backyard. So I had that experience growing up. So that is how a lot of it took its play into my work.
Mhm.
And because when you grow up, you kind of rely on the familiar to
Mhm.
tell your story. And it is my story, but also what you see in the world, what's going on in the world. That's
Mhm.
how you depict what you put into your art.
Mhm.
And I guess that's how a lot of artists, when you want to experience their artwork, you have to consider what they've been through, what's going on with them, how does this come into play within the art world, that sort of thing.
That's awesome. You know, I have been doing quite a few interviews with textile artists, and it's very, very different than, say, the other artists that I've been interviewing. And every single one of the artists for textile really talk about who they are and what they're putting into that piece. And so what, in reference to your art, really makes your pieces unique from what you're putting into them?
Well, how and what I put into my art is based on, I guess we all watch TV, we all listen to the radio,
Mhm.
we all know what music makes us jump,
Mm.
dance, feel good, right? Especially
Right,
right now with what's
right.
going on in the world. You have to turn off the TV. You want to hear something that makes you happy. You want to see color. All of
Mhm.
that comes into play. You rely on certain things within your past. Mickey Mouse, Pink
Mhm.
Panther.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know. For me, when I first started weaving, I used to take breaks because my hands got tired.
Mhm.
The strings, I make the strings tight for my warp. And a lot of time it takes a lot of hand strength to do that. So it makes your hands tired. So I used to take a break and I used to play Angry Birds on my phone. And so that was one of the stories from my first rug. So a lot of that plays into how or what you put into your rug. Recently, I've been relying on a lot of my memory from Tucson when I used to live down there, because I used to go out dancing a lot at night to raves, clubs, that sort of thing. And I would depict that in my rugs. And so just how the body moves. And sometimes when I used to paint, I used to find myself really, it used to be very orchestrated how you paint. So I used to paint very large and I would find myself making big strokes. So a lot of that play goes into that. And I noticed, as subtle as it may seem, when you're weaving, you still put a lot of that motion into your work back and forth. And so it can wear you out, your shoulders, your hips, your upper body, all of that comes into play. And especially when you're warping, I notice my back will get tired when I'm warping, because I will have to warp big looms on the floor because of space, I guess you could say, or it's windy outside, that sort of thing. So that's how, but mostly when I speak of narrative, a lot of people don't know how I do that. When I was in college, I listened to a lot of professors speak about writing. I read a lot of books. You know, sometimes you'll come across something when you're out somewhere and you see it. I don't pick up so many things anymore because I don't know who's handled it. But you look at it and you wonder, how did that get there? How did this scratch get on the wood? Who painted this? How did it get there? All of that has a story. Then things start to come to motion in your mind. So you speak to it. With my yarn, I speak to it. I said, who touched you before? How did you get here? Whose fleece did you come from? How did you get colored? How did this, when you see it in a brush, in the thread of yarn, it's the discoloration of the yarn. You wonder, how did it get here? Was there more oil in it than other parts of the yarn? Is that how it became so light in this area and darker in this area? You wonder about those things, especially when somebody weaves, they're going through things in their own life. So you know that so-and-so went through this in their lifetime when they were going through this rug, especially if it's a large rug. So they're weaving a bit of their own self into that rug as it goes. And I kind of speak of it also in the same way because I try not to throw my yarn away. I have a large bag of scrap yarn. I'll show you. Scrap yarn.
Yeah.
And I have several bags of those. So how I think of it is ourselves, we're a culmination of our ancestors. And each generation that goes before us has something collected from that person before them that came before them and instilled in them. And they somehow see what's right and they try to instill it into you. So a while back, I wove a rug for a market. It was called Scrap Girl. And that was a culmination of scrap yarn where I did an eye dazzle at the bottom and had a portrait of a girl at the top. But I called it Scrap Girl because we are all scraps of our ancestors. But no scrap is scrap. When you can still use it, it becomes valuable later in life. So we all are a culmination of our ancestors and the people that came before us.
That's so beautiful because I think that's a lesson to be learned. It's something that I feel that is consistent with artists, is just this ancestral thing that they're pulling into the present time. And so and there's, having not been in this art arena before, because you try to do that even as a professional, Native American professional, it's very unique. So I wanted to know, you were talking a little bit about your parents and what they did, and that your father was a painter. Who actually taught you to weave?
The actual lesson was very early on, but I mean, I never really took weaving serious. I always wanted to learn, but I never actually tried it until I guess about 10 years ago or so.
Wow.
My grandma was still living at the time, and that's my maternal grandma. So, when you grow up Navajo, you spend a lot of time with your maternal grandma because traditionally, the man goes to live with the women's family usually, and there's lots of stories that go behind that. But we always spent a lot of time. For one, my maternal grandma lived only 30 miles from Winslow. So we would spend a lot of time out there. They had a cattle ranch. So we would tend to our cattle by horseback. My dad did. And I can't ride horses. Just to let you know, I'm putting that out there. But when I used to be left alone with my grandma, I used to lay in the bed and I used to listen to her weave. But there's you used to always hear the thud of her weaving comb and the shuttle pass through the warp. And so
Wow.
that became familiar. But I noticed that how the strings were divided up, how when she pulled them forward, she pulled the strings in the back forward, and
Mhm.
that's where the thread went through. Then she had to stick dividing the thread. So she would push the shuttle back through, and that's how everything worked. So growing up, you kind of have an idea how design comes together. And that's basically how I learned. Those were my early lessons. I didn't know I was learning that then, but you kind of get an idea of how it works. So
Wow.
when it came time for me to learn way later, I'm 43 now, but when I finally decided to learn, she just had told me. I was working for the clinic at the time, and I was very stressed. I mean, you know, when you work with people who are ailing, they
Mm.
can be very short-tempered. So you get a lot of people. I feel for doctors, I feel for nurses, especially right now, but they get really barked at by family members. You have people getting up on you from all sides. So you have to work through it as best that you can. But I was very stressed because I worked in urgent care, and I just got tired, so I quit. So my grandma said, you should learn how to weave.
Mm.
And I had a cousin who also wove. Um, and she says, yeah, you should learn how to weave. So I started to learn how to weave, and I tried my first rug. It was a storm pattern, I remember, in Ganado red colors. And it took me forever, like maybe 9 months to finish the rug. It took forever, 6 months, I think.
How big
And
was it?
it wasn't very big. It was like maybe less than 12 inches and less than 6 inches.
Wow.
But managing the space for a storm pattern that big was very small. It might be a little bit bigger, but that was I don't know. I always challenge myself, even with painting. Can I
Mm.
do this? Yes, I can. Then you just go for it. That's the
Right.
best way. I think sometimes you just have to go for it. You have to have the gall and the gumption just to go in, head in, and just say, this is what I'm going to do. And when I took a long time that first time, I really said, I'm going to do a bigger rug. So I put a bigger rug up and I challenged myself. And it took me a long time to finish it. But I finished it, and it was a takeoff from a kind of like a stripe rug. I would call it a chief blanket or a Moki style chief blanket rug, but the colors were beige and gray. You know, you work with whatever colors you have, scrap
Right.
as it may be for some people, but you find value in the color. So
Right.
you work with it. And so in the middle, rather than, you know, they call them Spider Woman stars, I call them crosses or stars. And so rather than put those stars in the middle, I put butterflies, 3 butterflies in the middle. And my cousin looked at it, she goes, you're probably going to be good at pictorial weaving. I didn't think much of it, but I was always drawn to pictorial weaving because in my painting discipline at the university, um, they make you take color and design classes, color theory classes, um, figure drawing classes. So you work with all of those elements and work with composition quite a bit. So I was always drawn to that. But that was basically my foundation of how I went into weaving. So I depict a lot of those things with weaving, you know, how to make your eye move around with color, with design, with angles, that sort of thing. So that's what I use.
So I have to ask you, on that first rug that you created 10 years ago, were you satisfied at the 9-month mark?
I kind of look at it like this. You work on a learning curve. That's what my professors would tell me. So you aren't satisfied with it, but like anything, you have to love it. You have to love what you put forward. I wish I still kept it, but I sold it to my cousin
Mm.
for $20, my first rug.
Oh, wow.
Um, so you have to love it. You find joy in it later. When you see it, when you see the rug itself, it's almost as if you had a child. I don't have kids, but this is what I would imagine it would be.
Mhm.
You put it out into the world and you haven't seen it for a long time. When you're able to see it and when you hold it again, it's like seeing a child or a friend that you haven't seen for a very long time.
Right.
That's the affection I have for it. But no, it wasn't perfect. It was shaped like an hourglass, and there was mistakes here and there. I missed strings. I guess some weavers would tell you that that was how their first rug went. But there are some weavers who really, you're like, whoa, that was your first rug? That's amazing. But I guess when you produce it, you see all your imperfections.
Mm-hmm. So when in this journey, because I mean, 10 years ago is not that long, and you've only been with Swaya for maybe 5 years. So when did you like realize, huh, I can do this full time and I can make this a part of, you know, your living lifestyle?
It was, I, I painted for a long time, on and off. I wasn't very successful at selling paintings, but most painters in the outside world, you they get used to the idea that it's going to be hard. It's going to be a hard life. From a weaver stance, I started out small, and when I went to the university, you're able to take classes. You have people that coach you,
Mm-hmm.
and I took what do they call a colloquium with an artist. Her name's Barbara Rogers, and she um, talked about professionalism, how you price your work, who you show it to, taking professional pictures, and that sort of thing. So that's what I tried to do early on. Then Facebook came along, and Instagram, all these other things. So I learned how to market my work that way. Then I started being invited to participate in groups, but just but my first one is I really wanted to talk about Sherry Burnham and Burnham Trading Company. That was my first introduction into the weaving art world, because I went to rug auctions to begin with. And sometimes you don't get a lot for your work, but I took my rug several times, and the prices would just go up and up and up. And what it did is I took the square inches by rugs, and I took an average, and I went from there. And
Oh,
I started upping my price from there based upon how those markets would go. Then my first market was the Uyghurs Market at the Heard Museum. I didn't think anything of it, but I sold my first rug there for quite a bit. I was surprised. And then my work started to go up from there. And that's just how it goes. Sometimes you don't know how it's going to go. The art market can be very fickle depending on how things go, but and whose attention you're grabbing. That's the most important thing, because I think what a lot of weavers don't know is what they're doing. They don't really take the full value of their work. They need to see it as art. They're American artists. We fit into the scheme of everything. Before Native American art really took off, weavers or painters from New York were looking at weavers, Navajo weavers, and they depicted their style into their painting then. So it's something to think about. I don't know that a lot of weavers know about that.
yeah. Yeah. And I think that, you know, even the story about your journey with regards to being a new weaver, and then just even you know, the pricing and all of those things, those are some of the questions that I get a lot of from new artists is how do you price and how do you build your collection? And it is very fickle because there's not an easy answer to that.
What I really tell my brother's beginning as an artist, he's a tattoo artist now. His name's Yancey Katoney on Instagram, but he's wondering how he prices his work. I said, price your work according to the demand.
Yeah.
If you're in demand, then you price your height, you can go up on your prices. But if demand comes down, you need to make sure you put quality work into your work. And
Right.
that's what he does. So
Right.
I try to instill that into people when I tell them price according to demand.
Yeah. That's a basic marketing principle, right? That's very
It
good.
is. But you always, demand can be any number of things. If you're producing something that nobody else is producing, then you can up your prices.
Right.
But also there is the thing is, what dictates your market? What dictates your market? A
Right.
lot of older collectors, you notice, they lean more towards traditional type work. Now, are you You need to really consider all of it. Am I weaving myself into a niche where I
Right.
can never get out? Or when you weave something, are you challenging yourself? Is that what they're looking for? Do they want to really see something that's going to change
Mm-hmm.
as they go? Are they going to see your progress? How are you progressing? That's how you keep a collector.
Mm. Love that. Another thing that's very interesting about you, Marlowe, is that you don't necessarily have a website, but you have an online presence. And since August, when we did a virtual Indian market, we were helping artists to develop websites, most of them for the very first time. But in hindsight, and just even looking from a broader perspective of artists, I've come to realize that it's not about just a website. It really is meeting the artist in their market from an online perspective. And so I kind of would like for you to tell me what your perspective is regarding your online marketplace.
My online marketplace is a lot of times I find that with art, you know, I always ask the question, when you go to a museum, what do you wonder? When you see a painting, do you want to know about the person? Those are things I ask myself. And
Mm-hmm.
yes, I do want to know the person. Are they a good person? Are they a terrible person? What's their process? What do they go through? I myself, I don't ask like if they're using red here or if they're using orange here, if they have a triangle here, if they have a square here. I don't ask those questions. What does it mean? I ask myself, I don't ask themselves, what did it mean to them? I ask myself, what does it mean to me? How does it bring me joy? How does it bring me sorrow? How is it profound to be? Is it profound to me? Do I like it? You have to ask yourself all of those questions when you look at it. So I put, I don't put my, I'm always very careful online. You have to put yourself onto, you have to purvey a kind of presence that out there to, I know like right now, everything right now is so politicized. So I'm careful to try to stay away from that. I comment sometimes, but I try to stay away from that. And some Facebook users will know that I have my personal Facebook and I have my business Facebook. On my business Facebook, I always try to put professional stuff, pictures, that sort of thing, but I keep my personal stuff separate.
Mm, that's so true. Yeah, a lot of artists who have a huge presence, say on Instagram, because Instagram is a unique place where you can curate, and so artists just like you, what you're just saying, like I try to really separate my personal life from my professional life, and sometimes I think that's challenging because we want people to be a part of who we are with our art, but maybe that's not always a good thing, right? So I
Yeah,
love that. It isolates if we do that. So Marlowe, I have a question. Do you have any examples of your artwork to share with us?
I do. This is what I'm
Oh,
working on.
look at your loom. Oh my goodness, that's
It's a
so
large, it's a large loom,
cool.
and then I work. There's my coffee,
Mhm.
and there are my balls of yarn.
Oh, Marlowe, that's amazing.
And I was trying to organize my space, but all the yarn that I have right now, I have 2 large bags or 3 large bags in the bag, 4 large bags. I'm sorry.
Mm.
So I'm doing all of that right now. Right now, this rug is taking up a lot of my time, but I find that as you get older, um, your bones try to catch up with your body, and sometimes it takes a while to get going. So I'm working on this. I also have one on a pony loom, and I have a small rug that I'm working on a Pink Panther sachet. I can probably pull that off the table, but it's going to take a lot of work to show you. So
You don't need to do that. I love the gray with the rainbow, though. That is striking.
yeah, but that's something I'm working now, and I was wanting to work more figuratively on the top.
Mm.
Um, One of the things that really struck me is I told you that I like to work with a lot of figure. I was thinking about working with another breakdancer figure on the top here. it would
Mhm,
be the largest rug, figurative rug I did. And
mhm,
I was thinking about, I don't know, another theme that I was thinking about was a woman sitting by a river, wading in the water by the river in
mhm,
traditional dress and having the stars behind her,
mhm.
that sort of thing. But I don't know. Sometimes you talk to the space and it will tell you what to make.
Right. I love that. Well, thank you so much. You have been a joy to talk to. And thank you so much for being a part of this. And we wish you the best of luck. And I can't wait to meet you in person.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And in closing, I want to say, I wish everybody a good new year. Things that hopefully will change for the better. And I hope to see everybody in person.
Yes, me too.
Stay, stay safe.
Yes, you too. Thank you so much, Marlo. Have a great day.
Likewise, you too.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.